Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian. I am here today at the Rock Island Auction House. I'm taking a look at some of the guns that are coming up for sale in their December of 2015 premiere auction. And if you watch the channel a lot, you may remember that a while back, in fact, on a previous trip here to Rock Island, I did a long, in-depth video on the developmental history of the Colt 1911. Well, when I did that video, there were a couple very rare models that were missing from the lineup that I had available to me. And one of those pistols is here today, and so I definitely wasn't going to miss the opportunity to take a closer look at this guy. This is a model of 1909 Colt/Browning pistol, and it's a really interesting evolutionary step in the development of the 1911. A lot of the features, the major features of the 1911, actually originated with this specific model. So I don't want to spend all that much time right out here talking about this. What I want to do is get right in up close and compare this to the models that came before and after it, so that you can see what some of these changes were and where they came from. All right, so here's our progression of Colt Browning pistols. This is a 1905, which is very similar to the model of 1907 the Army tested. The 1907 was immediately followed by the 1909, and then this is a 1911 A1. Now there is a 1910 experimental or prototype model that I don't have here. However, those are even slightly scarcer than the 1909s, so eventually I may get my hands on one, but for the time being we will go with these three because they pretty much show the change in all the features. So the 1905 was the first version that was actually manufactured in 45 ACP. 1905 was when John Browning actually developed the 45 ACP cartridge. See, this has that humongous 45 caliber bore. At the time, these pistols were marketed by Colt as being the most powerful handguns on the market, which wasn't strictly speaking maybe true, but it made for good marketing. And a few of the features to take note of here. This pistol has a double swinging link lockup mechanism. So instead of tilting, the barrel actually comes back and then drops and remains parallel to the normal firing bore axis the entire time. So when I pull this back slightly, you can see that the barrel lifts up and moves forward, but it's not tilting. It's doing the exact same thing at the breech that it is at the muzzle. So that was Colt's initial design for this pistol, and that dates all the way back to the very first 1900 models. The problem with it was the whole thing, the recoil spring was acting on this lug, and this lug was what actually kept the slide on the frame. So if this lug broke, the slide could actually come flying off the back of the gun and hit the shooter, and that's not a good thing. Now, we'll also notice that this has a pretty darn square grip angle to it. It's close to, it's not vertical, but it's close to vertical. These pistols also had a heel release for the magazine. They had a big old external extractor right here. And they have no safety, no manual safety of any kind. So they don't have a grip safety like we're used to today, and they also don't have a manual thumb safety like we're used to today. The only control they have on the outside is a slide lock. Now, looking at, we'll skip forward for just a moment. The 1911 has a bunch of changes. It has a tilting, a single link tilting barrel. So the barrel actually pivots down when it cycles, like that. That allows it to have a block at the back of the slide, and the slide disassembles to the front. So this, the modern version of the pistol cannot have the slide fly off the back and hit the shooter, which is a significant safety improvement. On the modern guns, we have a magazine release here along the trigger guard. We have a manual safety and a grip safety. We have an internal extractor. That's the back end of the extractor right there. So that's what we're looking at on the modern pistols. And the 1909 is where most of those changes were made. So you can see by looking at the front end of the slide here that it bears a almost perfect resemblance to the 1911 as opposed to the earlier guns. So the early guns had the frame going all the way to the muzzle. The 1909 was the first gun where the frame actually ends back here, and then you have this spring cover on the bottom of the slide. We now have a barrel bushing, which you did not have on the earlier guns, and that goes hand in hand with the change in the operating mechanism. So when I run the slide on this, You can see the muzzle doesn't go down, it goes back, and then the breech end of the gun drops. So the barrel is actually tilting. Now it's interesting that the 1909 has a vertical ejection system, and the ejection port is cut on the very top of the gun. That was an experiment on Browning's part, and it didn't actually last. You'll see the earlier guns eject mostly out the side, and the 1911 is also mostly out the side. So experimented with this idea, and then they changed it back to something a little more along these lines. So the 1909 still has this big external extractor, which is not removable through the back of the slide. On the modern guns, both the firing pin and the extractor are accessible on the back by removing this firing pin plate. Well, 1909 introduced that firing pin plate, but it only holds in the firing pin for now. As you can see here on the earlier guns, you don't have that style of disassembly. We do also see the introduction of the magazine release thumb button. So this made it possible to eject the magazine with just a single firing hand, a nice improvement over the heel release of the earlier guns. We have the first grip safety on these. It's not quite the same style of grip safety. In fact, it's also got this retention plate on the side, which will disappear in the next year or two. The guns still don't have a thumb safety. That would actually be introduced first on the 1910 models. An interesting side effect of that, because it doesn't have a thumb safety back here, it doesn't actually have this spring tube on the side to give you two little spring-loaded buffers to lock the safety and the slide release in place. Instead, it actually has a little spring-loaded detent in the slide release itself and a solid peg in the frame for that detent to act against. On the modern guns, you'll see we actually have this tube mounted on the side of the frame, and that holds two detents in it. That was the simplified way to solve this issue once you had two separate controls that had to be worked on there. Of course, our grip angle is still the fairly vertical style from the early guns. You see that matches there. It was the model of 1910 that would first see this angled grip. Now what's interesting is the model of 1910 and the subsequent model of 1911 had a flat mainspring housing. So the grip was slightly more angled than on the earlier guns, but then when they went to the 1911 A1, they added this curved mainspring housing on the back to effectively increase the grip angle yet more. All right, disassembly of the model 1909 is done exactly like a model of 1911. You pull the slide back to the disassembly notch right there, pull the slide stop out, and pull the slide off. I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera because I'm going to be very careful about it. And we'll come back and show you a few of the subtle differences on the internal parts. Once we take apart the model 1909, we're going to find a few minor variances on the inside compared to the model of 1911 that would eventually be adopted. So, just to compare a couple of parts, this is the 1909 recoil spring, and this is the 1911 A1. You can see that the bushing here from the front, they extended quite a bit, so that helps keep the spring from kinking, I assume. If we look at the other end of the recoil guide rod, you will see that the 1909 here is circular. The 1911 A1 has this contoured shape to ensure that it will sit flush against the bottom of the barrel, like this. So that's a subtle but helpful improvement. In fact, if we look at the barrels, we can see that the 1909 right here has locking lugs that are cut all the way around the barrel. The 1911 A1 and the 1911, that is simplified, and the lugs are only cut or only left intact on the top where they actually engage with the slide. So the model 1909 is one of the scarcest developmental versions of the Colt pistol. There were only 23 of these pistols made. They actually started at serial number 0, which is a little bit odd, and went up to number 22. This one is number 22. We know for a fact that this pistol was actually tested by Springfield Armory in 1909, They put several hundred rounds through it. They did a bunch of different tests on it. They're actually testing this and I believe number 4 at the same time. So very cool pistol, has a lot of very specific traceable history to the development of the final 1911. And of course, it is for sale. So if you have a 1911 collection, I doubt that there would be any pistol that would make a better highlight for the collection than this one. It is in fantastic looking condition, and it's got that excellent military provenance. And if you take a look at the link in the description text below, you will find Rock Island's catalog page on it. They have a bunch of pictures, they have a description you can read, and if you'd like to place a bid and add it to your own collection, you can do so online, or you can come down here to Rock Island and participate in the auction live. So thanks for watching, and good luck if you decide to make a bid on this one.